Hello and welcome to another episode of Green Time. I'm your host, John Hickey with the Missouri Sierra Club. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the issue of climate change and the Black community and how environmental justice and climate change interact. And we've got two great guests to help us understand that question. Let me introduce them to you. Starting from my left, we have Romona Williams Taylor from MSlice. Taylor Williams. And MSlice, for the people who haven't heard it, stands for?
Metro St. Louis Coalition for Inclusion and Equity.
Okay. And I'm going to say MSlice during the show. I hope
Absolutely.
That's okay.
That's how we're known.
Okay. And then Reverend Rodrick Burton with the Northside
Missionary Baptist Church, and also a member of the Berean Missionary Baptist District Association, of which there's 69 churches and about 15,000 members. It's the largest Missionary Baptist District Association in the state of Missouri.
Wow. Well, let's actually start there, because I understand that the Berean District has started a climate change project that these churches are participating in. What's that?
Yes, now we just changed leadership and we have a new moderator, and we're hopeful that he's going to continue the initial work of starting this initiative. What it would be is making sure that the churches are in a posture of looking for sustainable energy, dealing with issues of climate change, and that information is disseminated throughout the various churches so that we're all speaking with one voice. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, we want to start taking a more of a leadership role among African-American churches, because a lot of times you don't notice that being an issue among African-American churches. So with our church, we installed solar panels on our roof, and then we also undertook a energy audit to and participating in a study, and I can't think of the name of the group right now, it slips my mind, but to see where can we do better. And one of our members, I've strongly suggested to the members if they can use sustainable resources, because it's all part of being good stewards, and that's all very biblical.
Yeah, I heard a radio story on the way over here, actually. It was very interesting and very relevant for tonight, that said that in Missouri, this year compared to 10 years ago, 15,000 more children came to the hospital because of asthma.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the doctor who was explaining the study, when asked, well, why was that? He said one of the reasons was the impact of climate change, mm-hmm. and more mold, more stuff like that. And if you look at what communities are being impacted by climate change, I believe the asthma rate in Metro St. Louis is double in the African-American community
Absolutely.
What it is in the white community.
Absolutely.
And that's the sort of stuff that MSlice works on, is looking at those environmental justice issues.
We look at environmental justice. Environmental justice is a primary focus area of MSlice, in particular the north side of St. Louis, which has been systematically, over a long period of time, created into an environmental justice area, or zone, if you will. And as the result of that, we have a disproportionately high rate of health issues, negative health issues. So health equity, environmental justice is rests at the core of MSlice's work, because everything that we do in our communities, it is impacted by what is going on in the environment around us. So in order for us to move towards comprehensive community and economic development, we must address the environmental justice issues. And it's a crisis.
How much awareness do you find in working here in St. Louis of the connection between climate change and air pollution and the health issues impacting the African American community?
It's very minimal, because it has the attention has not been placed on environmental justice in St. Louis. We have the environmentalist community, but the environmentalist community has not drilled down, if you will, into the very egregious environmental justice issues that exist north of Delmar, the infamous north of Delmar. So we see where the institutional and structural disparities and racism has even trickled over into the environment as well. And very egregiously, look at Carter Carburetor, a Superfund site that has sat in the north side of St. Louis for 40 years. Look at the built environment that is imploding upon the residents in my community, for instance. Mm-hmm. So when children are exposed to high levels of lead, poor air quality, we are surrounded by the interstate, so we get high levels of emissions from the interstate. We have railroad tracks, so we have high levels. We get the idling from the trains that stay on the track, the goods movement. Then we have the overfly from the airplanes, because the north side is right in the path. And I mean, I sit on my porch and I literally count the planes, the airplanes that are flying over.
Well, sure. When I fly back into Lambert, I would go right over like Calvary Cemetery, and I go, there's Fairgrounds Park, there's this, there's that.
And then we have the communities. The north side is in close proximity to Interstate 70. So we have high exposure of diesel fuel. Then just over here on Broadway, we have polluters.
All those different, the companies like the ones that squash up cars.
Yes, and chemical companies and everything like that. So the north side of St. Louis is a high-risk area, a high-risk environmental justice area. Then not to mention the brownfields, not to mention the abandoned cleaners.
Well, let's actually get back to that Brownsfields issue, because I'm not sure all of our viewers know what that word means. But let me first, going back to this Berean church climate change initiative.
Well, before we get to that, Romona touched on a few things that I wanted to comment on. One of the things that she commented about the various the trains that come through, the industrial polluters. I mean, not only does it affect African Americans, but typically it affects impoverished communities. And
absolutely.
So they don't have any choice. A lot of times when these big companies build, they don't have a say as to what they're doing. Or you take a look at those that are in National City, Sauget, these areas where they're right next to Granite City, next to these huge production places, and their political influence is not very strong, because they don't have the money to stand up against these companies.
Absolutely.
And these companies do pretty much what they want, and the people who live in the area, who are usually poor or African American or both, but other poor communities of color, are affected by the poor stewardship. And you start out about asthma. Well, as a parent of two asthmatics, and then my wife had asthma. She grew up in North St. Louis. That issue, when I ask people in the congregation, there's so many children that have inhalers. I mean, this is an issue that impacts people in their lives. And then if you have asthma, it's not that it's impossible for you to exercise, but it's very difficult. It's challenging. And the other point I want to make, many times with the African American community, or just communities in general, they don't know their history.
That's right.
And were it not for an activist named Ivory Perry, who researched about the lead paint, we would not know and have the various laws and the understanding that we have. But he sought out to get environmental justice, and we have the various laws that we have because lead paint was affecting people. And thankfully, there are not as many places that have lead paint, and if they find it, they make sure to get it out from someone working actively to address environmental
And we're
justice.
going to talk about that when we come back.
Great.
Yeah, that's a great, for example,
Yeah.
what Ivory Perry did shows that we can
And the
actually
building-
solve these environmental
Yes.
problems if we put our mind to it.
Yes.
So don't leave. We're going to have a short message from Ian Somerhalder about climate change, and then we'll be right back to the show.
We're all here to address the biggest challenge of our time, climate disruption. And unless we keep pushing for change and creating that change, these hurricanes and floods and droughts and heat waves might become our normal.
And that's why we are here today, to call on Duke Energy to retire the Asheville coal plant. Yeah.
Let's double down on solar energy. Let's build wind turbines. Let's be more energy efficient. Let's weatherize our homes. And we can build a better, healthy economy based on good paying, clean energy jobs that benefit our communities.
We, all of us standing here, we are the last generation of people who have the chance to stop climate change.
I truly hope that you join me in this wild adventure, perhaps the most important of our lives. Thank you, guys. That's awesome.
Hello and welcome back to Green Time. On today's episode, we're discussing the issue of climate change in the African American community. Let me introduce our guests again. We've got Romona Williams with M-Slice, and we've got Reverend Rodrick Burton with the Berean Church Climate Change Initiative and the new Northside Missionary Baptist Church. And at our break, you had just been sharing that asthma for you is not an academic issue. You've got several family members with asthma.
Yes.
What sort of response have you been getting from church members to the climate change initiative that you've been embarking on?
Well, we're just getting started because actually there's so many things that affect the African American community. I guess for sometimes it's a hesitation that, this is one more thing. We have all these ailments, but many times it's interconnected. And so where our church is, the area is a high rate of poverty. It's a area that's economically impacted. So it's affecting the people. It's part of the
not a priority.
mix. They don't think it's a priority, but it is a priority.
It is a priority.
Because if you're not healthy, then you won't be able to work well and be a good worker, or you'll be not in a position to even make a good job search, or you'll be dealing with health issues. I have a number of members whom they're pretty much their whole life is being caregivers to children. One of the things I want to say is where our church is located in 27th Ward, we have the highest infant mortality rate in the state. St. Louis is number 4 in the country. And part of that is, part of it is not lack of prenatal care, but it's also environmental issues that are affecting mothers who are pregnant. And they're showing up and being, coming in a loss of the children, in miscarriage. That's the word I was trying to think of. So this is affecting us, but with so much on your plate, sometimes you want to take on, and it's just a matter of educating and creating an awareness, and then also I believe Ramona's doing a great job being a bridge between environmental groups, because many times they have not had a conversation with the African American churches, and so she is part of a movement that we're very grateful that's bringing that conversation. Matter of fact, she invited me to one of the meetings here in town, which was at our center, to where I was exposed to, and then I took that information back to our district and said, hey, we need to be a part of this.
Yay.
Yeah.
And that's our Acting on Climate Network.
Yeah,
Acting
and
on
I remember
Climate Together,
being there at your church at New Northside in the educational building and hearing about the initiative and hearing about a lot of good stuff going on, I was very enthused by it. And one of the things we talked about before the break, one term that you mentioned, Romona, was brownfield. What's a brownfield?
A brownfield is basically an obsolete industrial facility that is contaminated. And because there was a lot of industry in St. Louis at one time, and over the years that industry has left, and so our communities are overburdened with these type of structures, obsolete and very dangerous structures in our community. We have old packing houses. A brownfield could also be an abandoned gas station.
And how does this prevalence of brownfields impact the economic opportunities within the neighborhood?
Well, number one, they drive down the value of the communities. And it also has a psychological impact. Just seeing this constant blight in your environment every day, all day, year in and year out. So, given the number of vacant properties and houses in our community that have not been litigated because they've been vacant for so long, and mold.
And prohibitive costs to develop. If they know they have to clean up a giant mess, who's gonna put in some new plants?
So
right. And then where do the jobs go? The jobs go to the ex-urban fringe.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult to get to if you live in North St. Louis.
So area-wide, I mean, the north side of St. Louis as an area could be classified as a brownfield. And it is just really, you know, John, I've worked in community and economic development for 30 years. I've never seen the likes of the north side of St. Louis. And I've lived in many urban areas, but something different happened here. And the high asthma rates, obesity, heart failure, all of the ills are so ingrained in our communities that it is a crisis. And it is having an impact on the entire region. So the city wanted to pass a $180 million bond measure, Prop 1. However, for the last 40 years, the city has robbed itself of property taxes by allowing the north side of St. Louis to turn into basically a waste area.
So then these brownfields, since they're not producing property taxes like a going concern,
Absolutely.
that hurts the budget of the city to do everything.
It hurts the budget of the city. It hurts the local school district. It hurts attracting economic development and businesses to our community, to the area. It is having a significant economic impact, social and economic impact on not only those of us who live in the north side of St. Louis, but the entire city, the entire region.
Sure. Well, and speaking of elected officials stepping up.
Could I jump in right
Sure,
here?
jump right in.
One of the things that economic justice will look like is very often we want businesses to come and you see our politicians soliciting to pay. But where we need activism is for the politicians to say when a business is closing down or moving, or as they think of their long-term plan, that there's a plan to clean up the sites so that they're not leaving a brownfield. And when we just allow businesses to leave without the city say, hey, wait a minute, here's the responsibility that you have before you leave or before you shut down, so that there's not a golden parachute to somebody. You take care of what you have used.
And also schools.
Right.
When school districts close schools, they should have a repurposing plan
Sure,
for that property in place instead of leaving all of these elephants in our community.
Yeah, it's your basic rule. If you make a mess, you clean it up.
If you make a mess, you clean it up.
Just
Sure,
like
but
in one's
I'm
house
very
and
concerned
same in the
about
community.
These private sector, they're like, okay, well now we need to close down, and then they just leave, and they just leave a giant mess. And someone else looks at that and says, we can't afford to develop that because then we would have to clean all that up. If our politicians are going to be advocates for us, they're going to say, hey, look, when they say maybe someone's going to do bankruptcy or something, well, listen, you are going to be responsible for, in your bankruptcy plan, leaving money to clean up the area so this can be repurposed, because you have used this area, you have enjoyed it, you've made money off it. Now, whatever the circumstance, whether you're just transferring, we see companies just move to another city. Mm-hmm. They should not be allowed just to leave.
After getting tax credits. They should not be allowed, because it impacts the citizens and it harms us from making more money to help the citizens pay for the services that they need and they deserve.
And that's why we have to organize.
Right.
That's why organizing is so important.
And I know one of the things that President Obama was talking about in terms of his broad initiative on climate change is something called Power Plus, which is reinvesting in communities that have got the short end of the stick from these economic changes. And so that, I know, is a piece of the puzzle, although it needs to get through Congress, and Congress is dragging its feet. But one thing I want to talk about when we get back from after the break is the Clean Power Plan, and is the rollout that the President Barack Obama gave. But before that, we want to take a quick break for our viewers. We're going to watch a short program about Siobhan Washington and her experience with the health impacts of pollution from coal-fired power plants. Let's watch this short video. Thank you.
My mother's sister is in remission. She has cancer. My mother's brother died of cancer. My godmother, who lives across the street, also passed away, and she died of cancer. My neighbor across the street died of cancer. My mother passed away in 2003 from lung cancer. My mom was a healthy person. She was a nurse. I'm sorry.
Welcome back to Green Time. On today's episode, we're talking about the impact of climate change on the African American community. We have two knowledgeable guests. I'll introduce them one last time. Romona Williams from M-Slice, Reverend Rodrick Burton from New Northside Missionary Baptist Church and the Berean Church Climate Change Initiative. To end up our show, I know all of us watched President Barack Obama announce the release of the Clean Power Plan, which is designed to reduce carbon pollution and reduce other air pollution and address some of these problems we're talking about. Reverend Burton, when you saw that, what was the main impact that you walked away from that speech with?
Well, that someone has to take responsibility, and I was very hopeful that to hear a leader of the free world, the most powerful nation in human history, saying we need to be more responsible with how we get our energy and the legacy of not, being good stewards of what we've had over all these years.
Okay, great. Same question for you, Romona.
I think when I got out of it, first of all, it was just a thrill, and all of us who are in the industry, the environmental industry, one way or the other, is something that we had been long awaiting and anticipating. But what I got out of it, for me, was the focus that is being placed on the most vulnerable communities, and looking at the issues and how we will be able to empower our communities of color, low wealth. How will we be able to empower those communities to become more resistant and more adaptable?
Okay. You know what line stuck with me? Is the line where he said, we're the first generation to directly experience the impacts of climate change, and we're the last generation that's going to be able to fix it.
And he said that.
And I thought that was very powerful. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Green Time. Thanks on behalf of the entire crew in the Missouri Sierra Club.